So I want to welcome you to our What to Know Before We Go webinar. We're looking forward to having you here. And as we get started, I just want to give you a slight warning. I'm working from home tonight. I usually would work from the office, but we had Armageddon coming here through Washington, D.C., so I want to make sure I got home and would be able to provide this for you. So I've informed the dog he's not allowed to bark, and we'll try and make sure that he adheres to that. All right, so what we're going to do tonight is I'm just going to give you some quick overview about the webinar, and we're going to talk about some keys for being heard, some homework assignments, and your checklist. Now, I want to be clear that on this webinar, we're talking mainly about how to prepare for your meetings. The policy webinar is going to be next week, so just keep that in mind. So we won't be going a lot over policies. We will show you where to find the federal agenda, but for the most part, this is going to be about the process of preparing for the meetings. So about the webinar, you all have joined in mute-only mode, which means that you could speak all you wanted, but I won't be able to hear you. And the reason why we do that is to mitigate any background noise. You can certainly ask questions. You'll find a questions box if you hit the little plus sign next to the questions box. You can open that up and you can type in questions, and I will address those. I'll stop periodically and address those as we go along. You'll also find, if you can't find the questions box, there's a toolbar on your screen, and if you're not seeing that, you'll see a red background with a white arrow on it, and if you click that, it will open up the toolbox and you can find all these cool things that I'm talking about. But have no fears. If you can't find the question box and you have a question follow-up afterwards, don't worry. We'll definitely be there to help you. We won't abandon you. One of the questions we always get, so I'll address it right up front, is whether we'll have follow-up materials and the recording available, which we will. So this PowerPoint will be available, and we'll also have the recording up on the National Bike Summit site. So you can enjoy this over and over and over again, share with your friends and family. I know that that'll be extremely exciting for you. Now, for those I haven't met, or even if I have, my name is Stephanie Vance, and I've had the pleasure of working with the Bike League for many, many years now, and our company, Advocacy Associates, is the one helping schedule the meetings. And I basically do a lot of the training for some of our first-timers, our What to Know, this obviously What to Know Before We Go series. I come at it from the perspective of a congressional staff person, so I worked for many, many years on Capitol Hill, more than I care to admit. And so I had people come in and speak with me, and I thought people could be a little more effective in their communication. So I started this company to help people be better citizen advocates, and that's why you guys have been so successful, is because hopefully, one of the reasons I've been able to work with you for a while. And I did used to work for Congressman Earl Blumenauer, who I know is obviously the biggest champion of the bike movement in the Congress. So, and I also had this beautifully airbrushed picture of myself, so I had to throw that up there. Now I want Karen to be able to say a few words. She's with the League, and I know she wants to welcome you, and you're not officially welcomed until you're welcomed by Karen. So go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. I'm Karen Whitaker. I'm the Vice President for Government Relations here at the League, and I just want to thank you all for getting on this webinar and for coming to the summit. You know, when you come to the summit and you do these meetings with your congressional members, it really does make a difference. These meetings you have and the relationships you're building in doing that really help me do my job and the League push for more bicycle-friendly policies and funding. Last year at the summit, we had 2 asks. One was on the Transportation Alternatives Program and one was on Vision Zero. Elements of both of those asks were in the final transportation bill that passed in December, and that bill was a lot better than we had expected it to be. So the summit, the participation by you and colleagues and peers has really helped make a difference. So I want to thank you again for being on this. Stephanie's going to help you know what you need to do to prepare and to have those effective meetings. And I'll be back next week to talk about the ask. So thanks for being here, and thanks, Stephanie.
All right, thank you. So let's launch right into how we're going to get going on some of the information that you'll need to get ready. So first of all, I just want to make sure that everyone knows that if you want general information about what's going on with the summit, the Bike League site has all of that. And basically, if you go to the home page, you can click on the Together We Lead link, and then you'll get to the information about the summit. So if you have any questions about, things like what's happening when, and when the various exciting trainings are. For example, I'm doing the first timer, so that should be fun. There's always prizes. You can check it out here. Just make sure that you're familiar with that. And you can get to it straight from the Bike League page, or you can go to National Bike Summit 2016, and you'll get it there as well. So that's just to get stuff out of the way, the basics. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what your role is in this process. And as Karen mentioned, the voices that you bring to Washington, D.C. are really essential in, the policy development process. And I know that you're coming because you believe that you can make a difference, so I don't need to belabor that with you, but I do want you to know that legislators really do listen to the people that they represent. And your job is going to be to take the very weird things that happen in Washington, D.C. and connect them back to the people that the legislators represent, so back to the communities. And so to me, there's sort of 4 pieces of how you do that, the ones outlined here: education, public relations, advocacy, and lobbying. And we sometimes use those terms interchangeably, so I just want to give you my definition of those and where I think you all fit in the process. So first there's education, and you'll see that's highlighted because I think that's an important part of your role, which is to make sure that legislators and staff people know what it is you do and who you are. A lot of people, people know the biking community, but they don't necessarily know the policy connections between bicycling and, surface transportation laws, for example, or environmental laws if you're talking about, some mountain biking, et cetera. So that education piece is really critical, you're going to play a very key role in that, but you also want to make sure that you go beyond educating. So the public relations step may not be something that you're too engaged with, but basically the public relations idea is to make sure that your legislators or staff people feel positively about you. So after you educate them, that's great, but they may not always feel positively, and so that's kind of the public relations role, which also feeds into advocacy. So advocacy is really all about making sure that they do something, that they're engaged in some way. And this is why Karen's going to talk next week about the asks and how important they are. But what you're trying to do is to get the little switch in the legislator's head that says, oh my gosh, you're asking me for something, I should pay attention. And that's really your role, is to come and say, here's what's happening in your district, here's what you're doing in Washington, D.C. or not doing, and here's how we want you to take steps that will actually help us in the district. And then there's lobbying, which to me is kind of what the, what professionals do. They're the ones who keep track of the 10,000 bills that are introduced and find the 4 that have something to do with what we're concerned about, and track things to make sure that Section 672 of Code 435 or whatever the issue is progressing, and to let you know when it's time to do advocacy. But to me, lobbying is not necessarily, I wouldn't think of what you're working on as lobbying. It's really more advocacy, and it's actually one of the most essential parts of the process. So within this sort of range of things, education, public relations, advocacy, and lobbying, your role is really in the education and advocacy arenas. So as you're going up to the hill, remember that. Your idea is to help get legislators engaged in the process. So how do we do that? I think, there's really, we all talk a lot about being heard in Washington, D.C., which I do think is essential, obviously, but we want to move beyond that to being agreed with. And, because we can all be heard. We can come to Washington, we can, pull out our megaphones, we can yell, and, someone will hear us. But whether they actually agree with us and move forward on our policy issues, that's what's really important. And as Karen mentioned, the Bike Summit has been an essential part of moving forward on a number of biking-related policy priorities. So you guys have definitely learned the skill of both being heard and agreed with. And if you're newer to the summit, here are some ways that we've achieved that in the past. So first of all is to know what you want. And this is where the ask is important, and this is where Karen's going to, with the topic Karen's going to focus on next week. But you really want to think about two kinds of asks: relationship building asks and policy asks. So the policy asks are, again, and I'll show you where the federal platform is so that you can at least take a look at some of the things that are being worked on. But the policy asks are going to be things like, will you support this specific piece of legislation, or will you join the Congressional Bike Caucus? Those are policy-oriented asks, which are the ones that you'll be making here in DC. But there are also relationship-building asks, and those are, will you come and visit us in the district? Will you join us on a bike ride? Will you talk with one of our advocate groups? Those are the kinds of things that you ask legislators and staff to do that may not necessarily immediately be something that puts them on the line policy-wise, but it does help build that relationship. And we'll talk in a little bit about some of the follow-up work you want to do after your meetings, and those relationship-building asks are going to be a really important part of that. So there's a number of them, but my key point here is to just, Congress is a decision-making environment. Members of Congress and staff people, they will pay the most attention to issues when they have to make a decision about them. And so this is why different kinds of asks are so important. And you know, we'll talk about the policy asks next week, but do also think about relationship-building asks, particularly in those situations where you may be meeting with members of Congress who you don't necessarily agree with all that much, because sometimes you can get them to a little yes on doing something in the district, as opposed to you know, asking them for some big policy issue right away. Now, as you're thinking about the asks and who you might be talking with, here's some homework assignment for you before you can join next week's policy webinar, and you can do this after you've joined that webinar if you're more comfortable. But I do know that people like to make sure that they sort of understand the basics. So if you take a look at the Bike League's website and you click on their federal advocacy link and you go to the federal platform, I would suggest reviewing these materials, and if you can, doing it before the policy webinar next week, so that you can have a sense, a larger sense of how federal policy issues impact people, impact the bicycling community in the district. Because I know that you all sort of have that local sense, but it may be not quite clear yet how what Congress does is going to impact that directly. So take a look at this, and you know, the details of what you'll be asking for during the summit will be talked about next week. But this is a good place a really good place to start. All right. So the next thing to think about is who you're talking to. And I know a number of you, if you haven't attended these events before, basically what happens is, in this case, we're helping with the scheduling this year. So when we get the list of registrants, my firm, Advocacy Associates, we match that up with your own elected officials, so the people that represent you. And you'll usually have one House member and 2 senators, and that's completely based on the address that you registered with. Now, there are some states where state coordinators are scheduling the meetings, or states where everyone goes in different kinds of groups. But for the most part, if you want to know about the people that you're meeting with, just check out your own elected officials, and you can do that at house.gov and a couple other places. I'll show you those in a moment. But if you want to find out your own elected officials, I would suggest looking at the House member based on your address, and then the 2 senators from your state. Hopefully you know your state, because if you don't, we got bigger problems. But to do some of this research, I'm going to mention those would be the best people to start with. Now, I want to give you some of the best resources so that when you are starting to learn about these folks, you've got some key things to look at. So first of all, to learn about your House representatives, you could go to house.gov, and again, that's house.gov. And you can learn, you'll see here, you get to the front page of the site. Now, if you want to find your representative, you can type your zip code into this box. A lot of times you'll need your full street address because the congressional districts aren't outlined by zip code. But in my case, I know my mom's is, so I'm going to enter her zip code just to show you how it works. And if you'd like me to look up your own zip code, you can type that code into the questions box, and we'll get to that one. But in this example, the congressperson is Doug LaMalfa, who is a Republican. My mom lives in the 1st Congressional District of California, beautiful place. So when you find this person, you can click on their name, and you'll get to their specific website. Now, every legislator has their own structure for their website, so there's not any standard structure, which is sometimes a little frustrating. And when you get to the site, as I will eventually, I know, there we go, you'll see that, again, as I mentioned, they're all different. But for most sites, you'll find a couple tabs that I think are useful. First of all, there's generally one called Issues. And I notice I have some questions at this point, so I just want to make sure we're all able to see what's going on, because I know it's going a little slow. Apologies for that. So you'll see that there's a tab called Issues, and when you look at that, you should maybe read through some of the issues, not just transportation related, but related to other issues as well. So you'll also usually see a tab that says something along the lines of legislation, and that will show you some of the bills that that legislator has introduced. And I'll also show you how to do that on a website called congress.gov. But when you take a look at the issues, the reason why I think it's important to read through things that aren't necessarily transportation related is because you'll learn something about the way they see the world, the issues that are important to them, the issues that they like to talk about, and that will give you a sense of the kind of language that you want to use when you walk into their office. So Mr. LaMalfa, for example, is a very conservative Republican. And I think walking in and talking with him about more things like job development and economic development and those associated parts of the bicycle policy or the bicycle movement are going to be a lot more appealing to him. He also represents a very rural area, so some of the trails issues might be nice for him. But knowing that going in, instead of going in and talking about something that would be of less interest to him, that might be of more interest to a more liberal member, is not going to get your meeting started off the right way. So I would take a look at their issues, just kind of breeze through those. You can take a look at the legislation they've introduced, and I'll show you another site to do that in a moment. And you can also read the About, and usually you can find some biographical information. Also, under either the About page or the legislation page, they'll usually have a list of their committees, their committee assignments, and that will give you another really important sense of what it is that they particularly care about. Now, you can do the same thing at the Senate, and that is conveniently senate.gov. So sometimes federal government makes sense. And at the Senate, you're going to look things up by your state, because every state you'll have 2 senators. And if you guys remember your Schoolhouse Rock, you remember that's the way it is. And so you'll click on the senators, and from there you can either choose a state, or if you already know your senator, you can click on that. Click on their specific link. So we'll just look at Mr. Alexander because he's at the top of the list. And he'll have a very similar thing. When you go, you'll find there's usually a sign-up page for their newsletter, which is good to sign up for before you come to the summit, just because, again, it will show you some of the things that they're currently working on. And you'll see we have the About page, the legislation page, et cetera, some of the things that we already talked about. If you want extra credit, you can also take a look at their current press releases, because that will show you what they're working on at the moment, which is always good to know, and what kind of buzzwords that they like in their communications. My old boss, Congressman Blumenauer, for example, loves the word livable communities. He also likes the word bikes, so you guys always had it easy coming and visiting him. So some other resources, there's a great site called congress.gov, and that's where you can look up the individual bills. Now, I showed you how on the websites you can look up some of their legislative initiatives straight from the sites, although not all members of Congress have that link. So you can go to this website, congress.gov. So it's house.gov, senate.gov, and congress.gov. And at congress.gov, you can find the legislators and see the very specific bills that they've introduced. So if you have a legislator you would like me to look up, we will take a look at that person. And if not, I'll just pick one here. Oh, let's do Mr. Blumenauer because he's so awesome. We always like to highlight all the great work that he's doing. And when you get to the page of the specific legislator that you're looking at, you'll see that in this case, he's a very active member. So he's introduced 4,000, or he's affiliated with, sponsored or co-sponsored over 4,000 bills. I do not want you to go look at all 4,000 bills. The two ways that I'd break it down are by sponsored legislation and then by the current Congress. So that's the 114th Congress. Then you get a much more manageable list of 31 bills. Now, he's pretty easy because you can find a lot of things that are going to relate to the things you care about, including the Bike Share Transit Act. So he might be a bad example, but other legislators, you'll find that they might have healthcare-related laws, or they might have environmental-related laws, or they might have job development or tax-related laws, small business-related laws, or I should say legislation. And so that will help you understand what's the best angle to come at your argument from. You'll also, and actually I do want to, there is a question about talking to legislators where we don't have summit attendees. I'm going to address that in just a moment. Before I do that, I want to also show you VoteSmart, and that's at votesmart.org. This is a fun website for a variety of reasons. This one you can look up every different legislator, and they'll have their biographical information. They also have speeches, their current ratings with various groups. It's also fun because you can, there's a quiz you can take here. Basically, it's a little bit like a Facebook quiz, if you know those, where you can find your specific political soulmate. So that might be helpful this time of year when we're all trying to figure out who to vote for, who not to vote for. But it's the same situation. You would type in the politician's name or the zip code, and then for each of them, we'll just use, let's use Mr. LaMalfa again, since we're going back and forth between more conservative and more liberal members. So you'll see you get that name, and then you can look at different things under his ratings, for example, and it always starts with the most controversial one, so apologies for that. But you'll see where he stands with various different groups who rate legislators, and you'll see too that there are billions of groups that rate legislators on a variety of issues. So you can always take a quick roll through that and see where they stand. You'll also see the recent speeches, because I'm sure you don't get enough speeches from politicians. So you can see some of the things that they've been talking about recently. These tend to be pulled from their websites, so you might also find that on the websites as well. But VoteSmart is a lot of fun. And the last one I want to show you is Open Secrets. Now at opensecrets.org, you can look up campaign contributions. Now I'm going to say this with a big, big caveat, which is you don't look them up so that you can go in and tell the legislator, oh, I saw so-and-so contributed to your campaign, so I think you should pay attention to me, or worse, so I know you're not going to pay attention to me. We're doing this because it will help you see if there are people that you already know who may be contributing to that specific legislator. So we can just take a look at, let's just look at one of the leadership. So when you click on that legislator's name, it will give you all the information about their various fundraising, what they've raised, who their top contributors are, and you can click down through. There's a huge number of things you can click through, individuals, PACs, expenditures, etc. And it's just interesting to do that so you can see who's already invested in that legislator, and it will also tell you, obviously some of the issues that they're working on, and perhaps more important, it can also show you whether you already know someone who is a contributor to that legislator's campaign or has some kind of connection. That said, again, it's a big no-no to say anything about the campaign in the legislator's office. So this is for your background information only, but it is useful to know. Now, I did want to address that question about visiting House members in districts where we don't have a summit attendee, and that's a great point because some of you will be doing that. Some of you have requested that those meetings be scheduled. The key there is to just make a constituency connection. So if there's some way to let that legislator know that you impact the district, let's say you're a business owner and you have outlets in the district, let's say that you are working on trails in the district, you have a community group that rides in the district, it's some way to make sure that legislator knows that what you're talking about impacts their constituents. So even if you don't live there, if you have some connection to working there, if you have some connection to serving people there, it will be relevant to that specific legislator. So hopefully that's helpful. It does require a little bit more research ahead of time so that you can figure out the answers to some of those questions about the connections. All right, so we've talked about who you're talking to. You've got some ways to get that information. I also want to mention as part of who you're talking to, the staff people. And this is particularly important for you all since you will be meeting with staff. The Congress is out of session on the times that you're there. But all the research that I just showed you how to do is as applicable to staff, if not more so. And the reason is because staff people are sort of appendages of the legislator. They view, they are there to represent that particular legislator's views, and often it is better to meet with the staff person than the member. I know that as we're scheduling your meetings, we're going to be able to get you longer and more in-depth meetings because you are meeting with staff people. They have more time, they know the issues better, and they're the ones who are really moving the legislative agenda forward. So don't be disappointed that you're meeting with staff people. You should be very pleased to be meeting with staff people. And some of the key points, you'll be wanting to talk to the right person, and we're the ones who are scheduling that, so we're making sure to get you with the transportation people. They may know less about the issue than you do, particularly as it relates specifically to bicycling, so this is a great opportunity for you to, again, play that education role that we talked about. As I mentioned, it has huge advantages over member contact. As a former staff person, I can say that with the member of Congress, you'd probably get, a 5-minute, what we call grip and grin, with some sort of overview generally of issues. With a staff person, you're really going to have a substantive conversation. Expect and appreciate youth, obviously. They are all quite young, so it can feel a little uncomfortable as to whether they're actually the right person to send the message to, but they are, and they're the best and the brightest, and they're the people that the members of Congress are calling when the legislators are going down to the floor to be reminded how to vote. The big difference is just a matter of pronouns. So everything that I just showed you about learning about the legislators applies when you're talking to the staff person. Instead of saying, though, will you co-sponsor this bill, as you might say to the congressman, you would say to the staff person, will the representative or will the senator co-sponsor this bill? All of your arguments are going to be exactly the same. Everything that you say in terms of, I saw you introduce this legislation, or I see that the congressman is interested in this issue, it's all exactly the same. The staff people really just think of them as the legislator, him or herself, and all you're doing is changing around the pronouns of how you're making your arguments. And again, it's better than the legislator, him or herself, because you've got some time to really make a connection with them. So your homework assignment for this one is to learn about the audience, so visit the websites, the bills at congress.gov, and if you're concerned about making sure that you get these websites, have no worries. This material will be available after the session as well as the recording. Check out their views on VoteSmart. You've got the open secret stuff, but remember that is just for your inside information. You definitely want to connect via social media as well, and I'll talk about that in a minute as part of your follow-up plan. But check them out on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Those tend to be the biggest ones that they use, and that will help you see what they're talking about currently, and as long as you find some things to comment positively on, if you do that ahead of time, the staff people will be overjoyed to see you, because no one ever comments positively on legislators' websites. And we have a legislator intel worksheet that you can use, and we'll have that up on the Bike Summit site. This is basically everything I've just talked about. You can use this to fill in the various information about your various legislators. And I promise that if you do this ahead of time, you will be far more prepared than 90% of the people that come into a legislator's office. Because most people come in and they're very focused on what they want, but they forget to have an understanding of why the legislator or the staff person they're talking to would want that. And they want it because it will help their constituents. So our first one was knowing what we want. The second one was knowing who we're talking to. The third one is that understanding of the congressional environment. And the fourth one is to know how to talk to them, what your message is. And for this, you would use what I call the SPIT technique, which is an acronym, because we must have our acronyms in DC. And it stands for specific, personal, informative, and timely. And let me just mention those, go through those quickly. And okay, I had a note about repeating where to find the legislator intel worksheet. So that's going to be with the materials. There will be the recording posted after the session, as well as the PowerPoint. And actually, at the end of the call, I'll go ahead. There's a handout section here, and I can go ahead and I probably will be able to post it on there. But you'll also get an email about where that information will be. All right, so how to talk to them, the SPIT technique: specific, personal, informative, and timely. So specific is knowing, again, specifically what you want, to be able to say to the legislator, we would like you to do X, Y, and Z. And that's the policy webinar next week. Also to be specific about why they would want that. The personal is to tell that local story, and that's, again, really while you're there, is to make that local connection. And the pieces of your personal or your local story that the legislator will want to know are how many people you impact in the district, what it is you do in the district, how it improves quality of life in the district, what kinds of economic development you bring to the district. And you don't have to have an answer to all of these. These are just the kinds of things that they'll want to know. Also in that local story, they like maps. They like one-pagers, and I know that the Bike League is always really good about providing that material. And Karen will go over that more next week in the policy webinar, but they really want that local information. Informative is, is the information, well, actually I should say personal is that personal story, the connection to the people. Informative is the facts, figures, and statistics. And they want to know the facts and figures and statistics as they relate to their specific district. Legislators don't really care what 3 out of 4 Americans think. They care about what 3 out of 4 of the people that they represent think. So even if it's just statewide, if you're meeting with a House member and they're getting statewide information, that is still extremely valuable. And as narrowed down as you can get that information, the more valuable it is. And then timely, and by that I mean just making sure that you're delivering a message in time for them to actually do something about it, which makes this a great time of year to be visiting, because you do have some asks that they might actually take action on, particularly as they relate to appropriations issues. So you are already achieving that timely part of the message. Now, to help you create your message, I have this message formula, and if you're going to be at the first-timer session at the conference, we'll go over this then as well. We'll do a little bit of practicing, and I know people don't like to practice, but it will be fun, and if you already come prepared, you'll be able to do this without being nervous about it. But this is kind of a 7-point way to get everything that I've just talked about into your conversation. And so you'd start with, hello, my name is, and that's where you say your name. and I'm from, and that's how you establish that local relevancy. So if you're a constituent, if you represent constituents, if you have a business, etc., that's where you would say that. I'm here to talk to you about, that's where you mentioned the key policy issues. Knowing of your interest in, this is where you'll put in that information you found out about your audience. So let's say you have a legislator who you know is really working on small business issues. You would start with that kind of argument. This is important to the people I represent because this is where you tell that local story. This is important to the people I represent because, well, let me tell you about a small business in our community who provided a commuting benefit, a bicycle commuting benefit to its employees, and their employees love it, or you have your own stories. But that's where you would tell that local story. That's why I really hope that you will, and that's where you make the ask. And again, the asks will be discussed next week, but that's where you're going to plug it in. And then I'd like to follow up by, and that's where you come together with your follow-up ideas. And I want to talk about a plan for follow-up that you can think about before you come to DC, because it's always a good idea to make sure that you have a follow-up plan in mind before you walk into the office. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you get the contact information. Now, a lot of this will be available through the app that we will provide as part of the scheduling, but we'll talk about that more as we go through what it does, et cetera. But you won't need to worry about memorizing all of this because you'll have talking points, et cetera, when you get to the summit. This is just a way to outline your message formula so that you're kind of thinking about what you're going to do, what your message you're going to deliver when you're in Washington, D.C. All right, and it should say number 4. Apologies for that. I don't know how to count. So the fourth thing we really want to think about is how to follow up. And let me just double check to make sure that we don't have any questions at this point. I think we're good. If you've got a question while we're going through, do feel free to type it into the question box. I'll be happy to address it. But this is really one of the key things, one of the things that a lot of groups miss after their meetings in Washington, D.C., is to use all their influence strategies at home. To think about, before you go into the office, to think already about what it is you would want the legislator or the staff person, because you'll be meeting with staff people, what you would like them to do when they come back to visit the district. Staff people visit the district, legislators visit the district. There's a lot of opportunities to connect with them there. And you have a lot of different things that you can do, and I purposely put wheels here because you're the bicycling community. Isn't that clever? So you've got your wheels. And so there's all these different ways of connecting with them. Obviously phone to connect to policy staff, leaving some basic messages about how you want them to vote on a particular issue. In person, this is that local district stuff. So you might want to attend a town hall meeting, and part of your ask at the summit can be, when is your next town hall meeting? Town hall meetings are when they gather people together in the district. You might want to tell them something that you would want them to visit in the district, so we'd call that a site visit, or something you'd want them to do in the district, like join on a bike ride. You might want to have them do a district meeting, so when they're in the district, you would go to their office and talk with them there, as opposed to coming to Washington, D.C. again, which we would love to have you, and it's great that you come, but if you want to do that follow-up, you can do it in the district. And then, of course, written communications, email, letters sent to the district. Now, the reason why I put it as letters sent to the district is because physical pieces of paper that come to Washington, D.C. are irradiated. They go through an irradiation process. So they come out of that kind of brown and crunchy and smelling bad. So we suggest electronic communications, emails, or if you want to write a letter, if you're desperate to write a letter, send it to the district office. And if you're not sure where that district office is, that's fine, because your fabulous research that you did about the various members and their house.gov websites, you'll find that under their contact tabs, you'll get all the information about their various district offices. So if we went to, we can just, sorry, my browser is moving a little slowly, but you'll see you can go to your various legislators' office and they'll have a contact link and you can find it there. All right. So, but one of the most important that I want to talk about, just to wrap up on, and then I'll ask if we have any more questions and if Karen's got any comments, is social media. So following your legislators on Facebook, friending them even if you don't like them on Facebook, following them on Twitter, checking them out on YouTube are really great ways to stay in touch with them to see what they're working on currently. So if we use, I'm just going to use someone, I always go to the beginning of the alphabet because you never know when your internet's going to abandon you. So this is Congresswoman Bass, and you'll see that she's got her contact information, her local office, the various service centers, and on her front page of her site she has her Facebook feed, which will hopefully pull up here in a moment. But on her Facebook feed, she posts all the various things that are happening, all the different meetings that she's had in the legislative district in Washington, D.C. So this is a great example. She hosted the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. And so this is a great place for you to actually ask them if they'd be willing to post something on their Facebook page. The other thing I would note is that you'll see here that this one was posted fairly recently, but you'll see this one, there's not usually a lot of likes or comments. So if she or your own legislator says something or does something that you agree with, you can write a comment, and if you're one of 5, the legislators or the staff people are definitely going to notice that. Here's another great example of transportation projects. And so you'll see that there's been only 3 people who commented on that. Now, let me just say, if you're going to do that, make sure that there are things that you want to comment on positively. Right now is a really great time to be using social media to capture the attention of legislators, because not a lot of people are using this as a strategy to get their word into the legislative offices. But if you do it negatively, then you're definitely, they notice that, and you're definitely not going to improve your relationship with the legislator's office. But this is one quick and easy way to already build something positive before you walk into the legislator's office. So that's Facebook. Make sure you check it out with your own legislators and see if there's anything that you can comment positively on. And also, you'll definitely want to be thinking about using it as something that they can post a notice about or a picture of when you're there having your meeting with them, or the staff people. Sometimes the staff people don't want to do that, but you can always take a picture outside the door of the legislator's office and say, oh, we went to meet with the legislator's staff people. Sometimes the staff people themselves don't like to be in the pictures just because, again, they are the legislator, him or herself, so they kind of want to be the behind the scenes. But do think about that as you're thinking about using in Washington, D.C. All right, so I just want to make sure that you have thought about some follow-up ideas, and then I want to give you your checklist for what to do to be ready, and then we'll turn it over to Karen to see if she's got any final comments. But your homework assignment is to prepare your follow-up plan before you walk in the door. When you're thinking about those thank you notes, remember that emails are a great way to send those thank you notes, even though we don't usually think of email that way. They definitely are. Ask about their upcoming town hall meetings. So when can you meet with them in the district? What can you show them at home? And when could you meet with their staff? And by that I mean local staff. So staff in the district. Every legislator has district staff people. And they're great people to try to get to know, because they're actually the ones who are in the community all the time. They're field representatives. And they're easy to meet with, and you can do that anytime during the year because they live and work in the district. All right. So perhaps most important, though, is to have fun. I know D.C. doesn't seem very fun right now, but it is, I promise. It will be when you're here. But this is democracy, and it's supposed to be enjoyable, so do feel like you're going to be enjoying it. So this is basically your checklist, some of the things that you should think about as you're coming into your meetings, what kinds of things you can prepare to talk about. And I'm just going to leave that up while I check to see if we have any questions. And I think we've addressed the questions that we had earlier. If you have any questions, do type them into the Q&A box. And with that, I will see if Karen's got any comments, and then we'll let you out into the world. So, Karen?
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. That was great. I think you all have your homework assignment right there for you. I just want to second what Stephanie said about those relationship questions. We will have some policy asked for you, but think ahead of maybe some things you could invite your member to, or things you can, stories you can share about the district. I think all of that's going to be really important this year. So again, thank you, and I look forward to talking to you next week.
Yep, thanks all, and yes, we'll be seeing you in Washington, D.C., and we'll try not to have the kind of weather we've been having lately. So thanks a lot. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Oh, and I do have a question, if people can jump off the line, but I did have a question here I want to make sure I address. How do we find out who we are grouped with once we get to D.C.? Wanting to make sure that you're finding your group. We will be seated by states on Wednesday, so you'll be able to find your group then. You can also check in, when you check in at the registration desk, we'll have that information there as well. So, but you will be seated by state during the meeting, so you'll have plenty of time to get to know your colleagues.
Yeah, and Stephanie, if I can jump in, especially for those of you who this is your first time, I really suggest you come to Stephanie's workshop. If not just for her talk, we're going to be doing a special lunch for first-timers and your state coordinators. So that will be an opportunity for you to meet your state coordinator, who's going to be coaching you through those meetings. So please do think about coming to that. That's at 11:30 on Monday, and then we'll do lunch immediately after that. And then you will definitely have times to sit down and talk with your whole group throughout the summit.
And there are prizes, so you could have prizes in the session as well as food. How could it be better? All right, I think we're done with the questions. So again, do let us know if you've got additional questions, and we'll be talking with you next week. Thanks so much for taking the time.